On November 30th, 1939, the world held its breath. The Soviet Union, a military titan with millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, and an air force that blackened the sky, marched across the border of its tiny neighbor, Finland. Joseph Stalin was confident. His generals had promised him a birthday present, the capture of the Finnish capital, Helsinki, in just 2 weeks. They even warned their soldiers not to cross the border into Sweden by mistake. So certain were they that they would roll through Finland without stopping. On paper, it shouldn't have been a war. It should have been an execution. The Red Army outnumbered the Finns 3-1 in men, 30-1 in aircraft, and a staggering 100-1 in tanks. But as the Soviet columns rumbled into the dense, frozen forests, they found something they hadn't accounted for: silence, the biting cold, and a ghost-like enemy that seemed to rise from the snow itself. The Red Army came to conquer, but they were about to walk into a nightmare that would humiliate a superpower and change the course of the Second World War. This is the story of the Winter War. To understand why this happened, we have to look at the map. In 1939, the Soviet city of Leningrad, modern-day St. Petersburg, was the jewel of the Russian Empire. It was an industrial hub and the birthplace of the revolution. But it had a problem. The Finnish border was only 20 miles away. Stalin, paranoid and preparing for a future war with Nazi Germany, feared that Finland could be used as a springboard for an invasion. He demanded that Finland move its border back, dismantling their defensive lines and handing over key islands. In exchange, he offered them desolate land in the middle of nowhere. The Finns, a young nation that had only gained independence from Russia 2 decades prior, politely refused. They knew that giving up their defensive lines meant giving up their sovereignty. Negotiations broke down. Stalin shrugged and gave the order to attack. When the Soviet bombers appeared over Helsinki, dropping explosives on civilians, the world was outraged. But the Soviet foreign minister, Vyacheslav Molotov, claimed on the radio that they weren't dropping bombs at all. They were dropping bread baskets to feed the starving Finns. The Finns, displaying a dark sense of humor that would define the war, responded. They took empty glass bottles, filled them with gasoline and tar, stuck a rag in the top, and lit it. They called it a drink to go with the food, the Molotov cocktail. The war had begun, and almost immediately the Soviet plan fell apart. The Soviets attempted to engage in a European war in the Arctic. They sent heavy tank divisions onto narrow logging roads surrounded by deep, impassable forests. The columns stretched for miles, engines idling, trapped in a traffic jam of their own making. This is where the geography of Finland became a weapon. The winter of 1939 was one of the coldest on record, with temperatures dropping to 40 degrees below zero. The Soviet troops, many from the warmer regions of Ukraine or Central Asia, were ill-equipped. They lacked white camouflage, standing out like dark stains against the pristine snow. Their vehicles froze, their weapons jammed, and waiting in the woods were the Finns. The Finnish army was small, mostly made up of reservists, farmers, loggers, and hunters. They didn't have tanks. They barely had anti-tank guns. But they had skis, they knew the land, and they had Sisu, a Finnish word with no direct translation, meaning a stoic, gritty determination to win against impossible odds. The Finns developed a terrifying tactic known as the Motti. When a massive Soviet column got stuck on a road, Finnish ski troops would emerge from the forest at night. They would strike the front of the column and the rear, trapping the vehicles. Then they would disappear back into the woods. Over the next few days, they would slice the trapped column into smaller and smaller pockets, or Mottis, which means a cord of firewood. Cut off from supplies, freezing to death, and under constant sniper fire, the terrifying might of the Red Army simply dissolved. In one famous engagement, the Battle of Rate Road, a few thousand Finns destroyed an entire Soviet division of 25,000 men. The road became a graveyard of frozen tanks and frozen men, preserved perfectly in the ice as a warning. But it wasn't just tactics, it was individuals. The Winter War gave rise to the deadliest sniper in military history, Simo Häyhä, a mild-mannered farmer who stood only 5 feet tall. He didn't use a telescopic scope because the glint of the glass could reveal his position and he would have to raise his head higher to see. Instead, He used iron sights, packing snow into his mouth to hide the steam of his breath. Dressed in all white, he became known as the White Death. In just 100 days, he is credited with over 500 confirmed kills. The Soviets were so terrified of this single man that they carpet-bombed entire forests just to try and kill him. They failed. There is a moment that perfectly captures the absurdity of this conflict. It's known as the Sausage War. One night, a starving Soviet battalion launched a surprise attack on a Finnish camp. The Finns retreated, but instead of pursuing the enemy, the starving Soviet soldiers stopped. They smelled food. The Finns had left pots of hot sausage soup cooking on the fires. The Soviet discipline broke completely as they gorged themselves on the soup. The Finns, realizing the enemy had stopped, counterattacked and wiped them out. For months, the miracle of the Winter War held. The world watched in awe as the tiny democracy held off the communist giant. But Goliath doesn't stay down forever. Stalin was humiliated. He purged his incompetent commanders and brought in General Semyon Timoshenko. The strategy changed. No more complex maneuvers in the woods. They would use brute force. In February 1940, the Soviets launched a new offensive. This time, they didn't just send men, they sent a wall of artillery fire. They bombarded the Finnish defensive line, the Mannerheim line, day and night. It was a storm of steel that no human courage could withstand. The Finns were running out of ammunition. They were awake for days on end. The sheer weight of numbers began to tell. The Finnish government faced a terrible choice. They could fight to the last man and face total occupation, or they could sue for peace while they still had an army left. On March 13, 1940, the guns fell silent. The Moscow Peace Treaty was signed. The terms were harsh. Finland lost 11% of its territory. 400,000 Finns lost their homes and had to relocate. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Technically, the Soviet Union won. They got the land they wanted. But the cost was astronomical. The Soviets lost over 120,000 men. Some estimates say far more. They lost thousands of tanks and planes. Finland, the country of farmers and loggers, had lost around 25,000 men. But the legacy of the Winter War goes far beyond the borders of Finland. Thousands of miles away in Berlin, Adolf Hitler was watching closely. He saw the Red Army struggle against a tiny nation. He saw their poor logistics, their lack of leadership, and their inability to adapt. He concluded that the Soviet Union was, in his words, a rotten structure that would collapse if he kicked in the door. The poor performance of the Red Army in Finland convinced Hitler to launch Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia, the following year. It was a fatal miscalculation. The Soviets learned from their mistakes in Finland, reorganizing their army just in time to face the Nazis. In a strange twist of fate, the Finnish farmers didn't just save their own country. By exposing the Soviets' weaknesses, they forced the Red Army to become the force that would eventually destroy the Third Reich. The Winter War stands as a testament to the fact that wars are not fought on paper. Morale, terrain, and the will to defend one's home can sometimes outweigh the heaviest of odds. If you enjoyed this look into the frozen forests of 1939 and want to discover more forgotten turning points of history, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell. There are many more stories to tell, and we're just getting started.